Welcome to the Land to Lots podcast, powered by Launch Development Finance Advisors. And now your host, Carter Froelich.
Welcome everybody to the Land to Lots podcast. My name is Carter Froelich, and I'm glad that you decided to join us here today. The topic of today's conversation is going to be developing a process that we can utilize as it relates to all of our development projects. In our parlance, we like to call this creating once and delivering everywhere, meaning if we have a really good plan that we can utilize on one project, if it's truly a good plan, we should be able to utilize it on all of our projects. Now, we at Launch, since we started in the mid-'80s, working with master plan developers and home builders financing their projects' infrastructure, we developed a process that we call the launch sequence. And we really believe that this is a process that will work for all of our clients. So we want to share it with you, not so much that you have to utilize our services, but you can think about these processes and these steps as it relates to your project and moving your project forward. And by moving your project forward, I'm really speaking in terms of project finance. So with that as a little introduction, let's talk about the launch sequence. The launch sequence and the process that we utilize is broken into three separate components, and I'll be speaking about each one of these components separately. The three major categories are planning, meaning what are we trying to accomplish and how are we going to get there? What do we need to achieve so that we're creating certainty and flexibility as it relates to our project? The second step is the implementation process, meaning how do we implement that which was planned? And then third is the management of the project and the project financing. The three categories are planning, implementation, and management. So when it comes to the planning stage, where we begin every project and where we recommend that our clients begin a project, whether they're working with us or not, is to have the DOS conversation. And if you're not familiar with the DOS conversation, I encourage you to go to listen to our conversation related to thinking about our thinking and the DOS conversation. But the DOS conversation in a nutshell is, where are we going over the next 3 years? What are the dangers that we need to overcome? What are the challenges we need to eliminate for us to get to where we're going over our next 3 to 5 year period? What are the opportunities we need to capture and maximize? And then the S in this case stands for strengths. What are the strengths that we have as a development company, as a home building company, as a team, as an entrepreneur to move our project forward? The reason that we like to start with the DOS conversation is, number one, it helps us understand what our clients are trying to achieve. But number two, it also helps them prioritize what they're trying to achieve and to put emphasis on the biggest, most the largest, most impactful priorities that they should be dealing with. So once the DOS conversation has been held and we have an understanding of where we're going, we need to get in and take a look at our construction costs. And so by looking at your construction costs, and depending upon what state we're in and what district we're utilizing, we need to go through and determine which of those costs are eligible for financing through this particular district. Is it just water and sewer? Could it be all public infrastructure? Could we finance both public infrastructure and private infrastructure? I mean, what are we trying to finance, and given the different types of financings that we can do, which type of infrastructure can be financed with that particular district or that particular reimbursement structure. So it's really laying out and having a great understanding of all of the costs that are going to be involved in the development of our project, and when we anticipate that we're going to have to expend those dollars. And we're going to get into, what we can be thinking about in terms of how we might be able to maximize cash flow. But for right now, we need to lay out all of our costs so that we have a great understanding of, at the end of the day, here's how much we're going to be spending. The next thing is that we want to have a clear understanding of what our property taxes are today. And if for some reason, we find ourselves in the county and we're going to stay in the county, then that's we're done. We just look at what our current county tax bill is. If part of our plan is to annex into a city so that we have water and sewer provision, public safety, etc., then we need to have an understanding of what our property tax rate will be once we annex into the city. One of the mistakes we often see is that if the developers are doing this, they may look at the property tax rate as it is today versus what it will be once they annex into the city. So we have to begin with the end in mind. Here again, that gets back to the DOS conversation, but we need to look at the property tax rate once we're under development and selling homes. And why is it important that we understand what our property tax rate is? Well, once we know what our property tax rate is, we can go to our surrounding competitive master plan communities or other residential communities, and we can determine what their property tax rates are. The reason we're doing this, and you hear me, chiming and beating the drum on this constantly, is we firmly believe that every battle is won before it's fought. And we want to have all of the data points in relation to, once we come to market, who are we going to be competing with? And in this perspective, we're looking at what is their property tax rate vis-a-vis ours once we begin development, once we form our district and begin to start issuing debt. What is our tax rate, total effective tax rate, going to be vis-a-vis the competition? So that's really important. We may decide to go higher than our competition. We may decide to go lower than our competition, or we may want to be at par with our competition. But we need to know as a baseline where they're at and where we're at, so that we know how much we can increase our property tax rate, which is going to equate to bonding capacity. With that having been said, now what we've done is we understand where we're going. We understand the cost to get us to get us to our vision. We understand what our current property taxes are. Now with that, we can take that information and begin to prepare what we call market-driven bond sizing analysis, where we're looking at increasing our total effective tax rate and then looking at what that would generate for our project in terms of net construction proceeds. We're then taking a look at what those net construction proceeds are and comparing it to our eligible facility list to see if we're able to finance all of it, 75% of it, 50%, 30%, whatever that is. But now what we're starting to do is to see when we're using this type of special district structure, here's how much of those costs we're able to offset without getting our property tax rate out of whack with our competition. That also is going to inform us on a lot of other different avenues that we need to start looking at. So for instance, if the district is not going to be generating a lot of bonding capacity for us, based on our phasing schedule, we may want to go talk to the jurisdiction and say, hey, listen, guys, you're wanting us to build a 4-lane collector road with a divided median, but our project really doesn't need 4 lanes day one. Would you be willing to allow us to construct just 2 of those lanes? So we're looking at our costs, we're looking at our pro forma, and we're seeing if there's any ways that we can reduce, eliminate, or defer, or what we're performing a red analysis, reduce, eliminate, defer those eligible costs that we had gathered at the onset of our planning efforts. And the reason why we're doing that is we're trying to push out costs until we begin to have revenue events coming into our pro forma, be those sales to builders, be those bond issuances, etc. So that's why this red analysis is so important. And so that's the next step, looking at what we can do to reduce, eliminate, and defer some of these costs. The other thing we want to take a look at this point are what are some of the other items we should be thinking about in terms of other types of reimbursement mechanisms that may be available for us. So, for instance, we'll be taking a look at the land use plan, and we'll be asking questions like, who are these other landowners? They are benefiting from our roadways that we're putting in, and it looks like they're going to be benefiting from our trunk lines that we're putting in and the lift station. Is there a way that we can tag them with their fair share costs sooner rather than later? And there's lots of different things that we can do to have other benefiting landowners pay their pro rata share of some of these costs. It just really depends on what state we're in and what the facts are of that situation. But we're always looking at different means of setting up reimbursement mechanisms, whether that is through impact fees, whether that is through reimbursement agreements with them, whether it's cost sharing agreements, whether it's bringing them into the district, kicking and screaming. There's lots of different things that we can do, but it's really imperative that we look at and start to engineer our cash flow so that we can maximize the amount of value we're bringing with the least amount of costs. As part of this process, now we're starting to have a pretty good feel for what we're going to be financing, how we're going to be financing it, when we're going to be financing it, when the money will be coming in. If the jurisdiction that we're beginning our negotiations with is collecting development impact fees, we want to have an understanding of what are these impact fees, and are we, as part of our district and as part of our project, going to be constructing infrastructure for which the city or the county is collecting development impact fees? If yes, then we want to make sure that we are understanding what our credits are going to be, whether that money is going to be coming back to us, whether it's going to be financed through the district, and what our development impact fee credits would be that we could pass on to the builder or not. So that's a critical part of the puzzle that we need to understand. Once we have all these puzzle pieces together, a lot of times our clients' pro formas aren't set up to handle the special districts and all the different reimbursement mechanisms that are unique to that specific project. So we need to either work with their financial analyst to get that information in their pro forma, or take their model, and we want to drop in these all of these inputs. So now that they have a record and they have a working model of how we're planning to finance the infrastructure as it relates to the small piece of the puzzle that we're working on through the special districts, through it could be tax increment, it could be different reimbursement mechanisms, could be impact fee credits. But now we need to get all of that information and to run it through the pro forma and to see if, from a financial standpoint, we're hitting the metrics that the developer expects them to hit. And if not, we go back to the drawing board and what can we change? We go back to the RED analysis, we go back to the eligible infrastructure, we go back to the market-driven bond sizing analyses. Do we want to go higher? Do we want to go lower? What happens when we start to change these metrics and how does that impact our cash flow? But once we have determined our plan of action, meaning we've determined the financing mechanism we want to use, we've determined the tax rate, the effective tax rate we want to utilize, we've determined other financing mechanisms we would like the jurisdiction to help us with. What we do at that point is prepare a financing plan, and we go in and talk to the city. And why, whether you're working with us or you're doing this yourself, why do you want to go do that? Because number one, what we have found is that it is important to get in front of the city or the agency and discuss with them, number one, who you are, what your project is, what you're going to construct, when you're going to construct it, what those costs are, what the impacts to the city are. Oftentimes we'll bring a fiscal impact with us, but they're going to say, hey, this is all great, but why don't you go back and write it down and then come and talk to us? So what we're doing is trying to take this very complex financing structure that we've put together, and we want to go and write it down on 2 or 3 sheets of paper, and we want to go present it to the city staff to get their feedback. Because they may say, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, this is a great plan. Let's go forward. Or they may say, Mr. and Mrs. Developer, we think you're onto something here, but you know what? That fire station that you may have to add in year 10, it would really help us out if you could move that to year 1 and if you could pay the operations and maintenance of that fire station. So they may throw some things in that we hadn't thought about. And then we have to go back and determine the financial impact of those negotiation issues, or if we want to move forward with them. But what we're doing is we're presenting our financing plan to the city. We're getting their input. We know at that point in time whether we think it's going to work or whether we think we may need to rejigger some of our assumptions. But at the end of the day, once we complete the planning portion of what we call the launch sequence, we will have had a meeting with the city, and we will have, at the end of the day, agreed to a financing plan on both the city side and the developer side, the agency side, to move the project forward. So that takes care of the first major element of the launch sequence, the planning stage. Stay tuned for the remaining 2 segments of the launch sequence: implementation and management.
You have been listening to the Land to Lots podcast with Carter Froelich. Follow us wherever you find your podcast to never miss a new episode.